Hello, and thank you for joining me. This is What I've Been Thinking with Marcus Cage, and I am your host, Marcus Cage. In this segment, I wanted to cover a video which I noticed from, a fellow YouTuber, Mike Figueredo of the Humanist Report. This is a very, very good video about Chris Cillizza, who was giving pushback to the notion that Bernie Sanders was treated unfairly by the media. Mike does a good job expressing some of the problems and flaws in that argument, and I don't want to take away from that. I feel like he nails that 100%. It's just something that I want to add to the end of it, which I felt also wasn't focused in on as far as a way the media was unfair to Bernie Sanders. So hopefully you guys enjoy this clip. Hopefully you guys give a shout out to the Humanist Report. Without further ado, hopefully you guys enjoy this segment and enjoy the video. Thank you.
Ryan Nobles of CNN, Bernie Sanders said that he believes that part of the reason why he lost the nomination was because of the media's propaganda, their nonstop bias against him. And this isn't just like an anti-Bernie bias. This is a bias that corporate media has against the left, more broadly speaking. So this isn't a surprise to anyone. I don't think this is refutable. What Bernie Sanders says is correct. Now, is the media the main factor why he lost? I don't necessarily believe so, but was the media a factor in his demise? Yes. Now, here's what he said specifically. I think what we saw from Nevada on out was a cry from the rooftops, from the political establishment, from the media, that they wanted anybody but Bernie. Anybody but Bernie. My God, I don't know how many articles they were about. We need anybody but Bernie. And, they ended up succeeding. And that's that. Now, I probably wouldn't argue that the media ultimately is what sunk his campaign, because, again, I think there were a number of factors, both inside and outside of our control, that led to Bernie Sanders losing and Joe Biden winning. But, I mean, to deny that the media played a role, I think you're being incredibly dishonest and intentionally obtuse. I mean, when you see people going on national television talking about how Bernie Sanders makes their skin crawl, or he's disheveled and unlikable, or you bring on body language experts to prove that he's lying, if you call him a hypocrite because he's a millionaire, because he sold a book, I mean, there's no other candidate that put up with this, right? So Bernie Sanders had more disadvantages coming into 2020 than any other candidate. Now, that's not to say that we couldn't have overcome the media's bias, but I think it's really important that we factor in the media's influence here, because I think that without them constantly shitting on Bernie Sanders, he could have won. Maybe they didn't, unilaterally cause him to lose, but maybe if they actually were as fair to him as any other candidate, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, maybe he could have won. I don't know. But what I do know is that the people who are part of the problem, like Chris Cillizza of CNN, take issue with Bernie's assessment here that the media played a role in his demise. And Chris Cillizza penned probably one of the worst op-eds I've ever read, where he talks about why Bernie Sanders is wrong without actually hearing any counter-arguments to his position. So he writes this about Bernie Sanders' quote that we just read. In just a few sentences, Sanders A lumps the media in with the political establishment as actors working to keep him from the nomination, and B lambasts the number of articles allegedly written seeking anybody but Bernie. In August of 2019, Sanders sent an email to supporters that read, in part, corporate and billionaire-owned media often tilts coverage against candidates who push a working-class agenda, an agenda that threatens the political power of corporations and billionaires. In February, Sanders' campaign manager Faiz Shakir told Vanity Fair that MSNBC is constantly undermining the Bernie Sanders campaign. Following his Super Tuesday losses, Sanders again turned to the media for blame. There has not been a campaign that has been having to deal with the venom by some in corporate media, he said. This campaign has been compared to the coronavirus on television. We have been described as the Nazi army marching across France. And as Margaret Sullivan helpfully noted in the Washington Post, there were, without doubt, opinion commentators at some major media outlets who wrote pieces deeply skeptical of Sanders' chances of beating President Donald Trump. But evidence of some sort of broad-scale effort by the media to keep Sanders from winning, There's not much of that to be had, and by blaming the media for his defeat, Sanders takes credit away from the remarkable comeback that Joe Biden, the presumptive nominee who he formally endorsed just this week, engineered. The point? The media is an easy scapegoat, but not always the right one. Now, believe it or not, I just read you basically the entire article with the exception of like 2 paragraphs. That was a bad argument. That was not an argument. Saying that the media is not biased against Bernie Sanders requires more than you just saying, well, here's examples X, Y, and Z of Bernie Sanders saying that the media was biased. No, actually go through the examples of bias, because there are numerous examples and even data that proves that the media was against Bernie Sanders. I mean, there was a quantitative analysis from In These Times that revealed MSNBC didn't just give Bernie Sanders the least amount of coverage out of the 3 frontrunners, but they also covered him the most negatively overall. CNN ran a so-called investigative report about aggressive Bernie bros online, but a computational social science study found that Bernie Sanders supporters online are no different than the supporters of any other candidate, but yet that narrative persisted. And we're not just talking about a couple of biased op-eds here and there that are worried about Bernie Sanders' electability. We're talking about non-stop bias against Bernie Sanders, almost none of which were founded in policy. If you didn't, remember this little compilation put together by Jeff Miami and Winkle the Bernie Bro, look at just some of what the media said about Bernie Sanders and the way that they talked about him and dismissed him.
Can I bring up the donkey in the room?
I'm Jeff Anderson. For 37 years, we have been fighting for survivors.
Bernie?
No.
Bernie Sanders makes an escape fraud.
Sanders' fading is a bigger story than people give it credit for.
Previous set of numbers about Kamala Harris seems to suggest that Bernie bros are actually a real thing.
He's just waving his arms around, talking about revolution and all, where we are going, and we don't need roads. I mean, one of the things I always hear from folks who aren't necessarily on the Bernie bus, so to speak, is that he's not really a Democrat.
I saw Bernie Sanders trying to raise money off of it. Yeah, my timeline's going to be on fire. That's what was horrible.
If you've seen any crossover, at least in those who are at his events, who kind of look and sound like Trump supporters. When you say he attracts those who feel like they're struggling to be heard and get their bills paid and their voices heard, that sounds like a Trump voter.
I see him as sort of a not pro-woman candidate.
And some people say, Bernie Sanders has done nothing between 2016 and today to expand his base, to expand his policies. He seemed like a socialist from the 1950s yelling at people in the same screechy voice, without smiling, without any kind of personal connection. Bernie Sanders has been talking about these same policies essentially since he's been in public service for the past 25, 30 years. But he actually hasn't done anything to pass them, right? He's talked a lot about them, but we've not seen any of these policies signed into law.
What happened with Hillary and what's his name?
Exactly.
You would take the risk.
I am excited. Are you asking out of every candidate?
I'm about to say the same thing he said in 2016 this time around. I think that's not working. That's exactly the point I was going to make. I think he kind of got lost in the shuffle. Other people have kind of taken these issues away from him, and he looked like the angry man in the center of the stage saying, "Get off my lawn." I think he comes off as mean. I think he's disparaging.
A socialist candidate is more dangerous to this country as far as the strength and well-being of our country than Donald Trump. I would vote for Donald Trump, a distinct human being.
No, you won't.
And let me tell you
Stop
something.
yourself.
And there is a lot more. You can make the case that Fox News was more fair to Bernie Sanders, because I don't remember where this article came from, but they assessed who's more likely to support Bernie Sanders, and Fox News viewers were more open to Bernie than MSNBC viewers. Why? Well, because even if Fox News is covering Bernie negatively 100% of the time, they're at least airing enough of his platform to where his message is getting across. But on MSNBC and CNN, they don't even pay him that courtesy at all. Now, again, I'm not going to say that the media is the main scapegoat, right? They're the main reason why Bernie Sanders lost. I think that it's important for the left to do a real, honest, and objective post-mortem, and I plan on doing that at some point, but I think that we need to wait for the dust to settle, for time to pass, so we can actually figure out what we did wrong. So going forward, we're stronger. We know how to correct the mistakes that we made. But quote unquote analyses like these from bad faith actors, they don't help the left. Chris Cillizza is trying to help you figure out why Bernie Sanders lost. So that way the next time you have a candidate that you support, you don't blame the media. You think, well, this isn't part of the reason why he lost. No, it is. It is part of the reason why Bernie Sanders lost. Not the main reason, but part of the story that we have to tell if we're going to be honest about why we lost in 2020. And Chris Cillizza is not your friend. And just the way that he talks about Joe Biden's comeback. This wasn't a comeback. Joe Biden did nothing. He won states he didn't set foot in. The reason why he won is because Obama got the entire establishment to coalesce around Joe Biden after he won South Carolina, which was expected. But the media came in, also assisted Joe Biden, gave him fawning praise, had this comeback narrative already prepared probably before he won South Carolina. And, all of these factors working together led to Bernie Sanders ultimately losing. But I mean, for you to say that the media didn't play a role in Bernie Sanders' demise, I think that's incredibly disingenuous. You're literally gaslighting people. And this is why people don't trust the media.
Mike laid down a couple of excellent points, and he backed it up with showing us actual data to prove what he was talking about, including the clips, which I remember there were nonstop amount of clips trashing Bernie Sanders, to the point where an older voter actually said the negative coverage that they saw on MSNBC made them decide to support Bernie Sanders. But what Mike didn't talk about in there is, which I feel is even just as damaging as being always negative about Bernie, the fact that you are not having the same kind of scrutiny on any of his competitors. There was no disclosure of how many of the campaigns were receiving money from healthcare executives or firms or lobbyists to go against Medicare for all repeatedly. There was no scrutiny on those things. Joe Biden was allowed to lie about his record repeatedly. He was allowed on the debate stage to lie about Social Security cuts, which he advocated for. And there was no pushback from the moderators at all. Even when Bernie Sanders actually called him out on the lie, the moderators still stayed silent. Kamala Harris, the things which Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard laid out about her record and about her keeping a young man on death row, even though she knew he was innocent, and it took for a judge to force her to release the young man. There were many other issues. Her letting Steve Mnuchin off. The same Steve Mnuchin who works for Trump, who's doing a lot of the same horrible stuff that he's doing, who talked about $1,200 is perfectly fine for everybody to be able to live on for 10 weeks. That same Mnuchin who was out there stealing houses with One West Bank, which Kamala got $100,000 donation from that same Steve Mnuchin. But that wasn't talked about from the media. The fact that Julian Castro was the Housing HUD secretary and so many people lost their houses. They talked about Michael Bloomberg's stop and frisk, but we didn't talk about Cory Booker's stop and frisk, or how Joe Biden's crime bill fueled all of these things. We don't talk about that Kamala Harris actually had stock in private prisons. We don't talk about any of those things. We don't talk about the same thing that Tom Steyer was doing that up until a handful of years before he decided to turn over a new leaf. There were so many negatives and holes in Democratic candidates that were never brought up. Instead, people like Andrew Yang, which I don't support Andrew Yang. I'm not a big fan of Andrew Yang, but he was treated very unfairly, intentionally mixing up his names multiple times, changing standards to try to keep him off the debate stage. And the same thing with a Tulsi Gabbard, the same thing with a Mike Gravel, any of the candidates who were not in the good old boy club network. of the DNC from the media, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, PBS, NPR, and most of the moderate podcasters out there, from your Stephanie Millers to your Barbara Boxers, you know, all of those types of people, the Pod Save America guys, all of these people, all in unison, protecting moderate candidates while looking for every single thing they could do to destroy Bernie Sanders, to destroy Marianne Williamson. There were plenty of candidates. Not only Bernie got an unfair shake, but to try to say that Bernie got a fair shake proves that not only are you dishonest, not only are you a hack, but you are part of the problem. And people like Chris Cillizza are the enemy, because they are not only gaslighting you, they are giving you flat out propaganda to try to control your thinking and tell you the bullshit that they were doing right in your face is not the bullshit that they were doing right in front of your face. With that said, I'll leave it there. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Please subscribe if you are not subscribed. Please like, please share if you really enjoy it, and please comment. I do enjoy your comments, and I do try to keep the feedback going back and forth. With that said, we'll leave it at that. You guys have a good one. Thank you.